My sister claimed my husband loved her, then she melted down when I proved her wrong in front of the entire family. I'm writing this from my parents' guest bathroom because I can't be in the same room with my sister right now and I need to process what just happened at our family dinner. I'm 31, married to my husband Gavin for 3 years, together for 7. My sister Sloane is 28 and has always had this weird competitive thing with me. Growing up it was grades, sports, who got more attention from our parents. I thought we'd grown out of it, apparently not. The past year Sloane has been making increasingly strange comments about Gavin, little things that felt off but not quite confrontation-worthy. She'd mention how Gavin always laughed at her jokes, how he'd complimented her outfit at a family gathering, how they had such great conversations whenever we all hung out together. I noticed but didn't think much of it. Gavin is friendly with everyone. He's one of those naturally warm people who makes everyone feel seen and heard. It's one of the things I love about him. Then about 6 months ago, Sloane started texting Gavin directly, nothing inappropriate in content but the frequency was weird. She'd send him memes, ask his opinion on random things, tell him about her day. Gavin would respond politely but briefly and always told me when she'd texted him. I asked him if it bothered him. He said it was a little much but he didn't want to be rude to my sister. He figured she was just being friendly. 3 months ago, Sloane broke up with her boyfriend of 2 years, guy named Kieran, who honestly seemed great but according to Sloane he was emotionally unavailable and didn't appreciate her. After the breakup, her texts to Gavin increased. She started calling him for advice about the breakup. Gavin would put her on speaker when I was around and try to give helpful but generic responses. It was clear he was uncomfortable but trying to be supportive. Then she started showing up at our house unannounced. She'd bring coffee on Saturday mornings saying she was in the neighborhood. She'd ask Gavin to help her fix things at her apartment, always when I was at work or busy with something else. Gavin started declining, said he had plans or suggested she call our dad or hire someone. Sloane would get this hurt look and say she thought they were close enough that she could ask for help. I finally told Gavin he needed to set clearer boundaries with her, that the constant contact was inappropriate. He agreed and sent her a kind but firm text saying he cared about her as family but needed to scale back their communication because it was getting to be too much. Sloane didn't respond to the text. Instead she stopped talking to me. For the past 6 weeks she's been giving me the silent treatment, won't return my calls or texts. When I asked my mom what was going on, she said Sloane was going through a hard time with the breakup and needed space. That brings us to tonight. My parents host family dinner every month. My older brother Reese and his wife Hayden were there, plus my mom's sister and her husband. Sloane showed up late, which wasn't unusual. What was unusual was that she'd clearly been drinking before she arrived, not stumbling drunk but definitely past tipsy. Dinner was awkward. Sloane kept making pointed comments in my direction, about how some people don't appreciate what they have, how some people take their relationships for granted. My parents kept trying to redirect conversation but she'd circle back. Then dessert happened. My mom brought out pie and Sloane suddenly stood up. She looked directly at me and said she couldn't do this anymore, that she'd been keeping a secret to protect me but she couldn't watch me be so oblivious. The whole table went quiet. Sloane said Gavin had told her he had feelings for her, that he'd been confiding in her for months about how our marriage wasn't working, that he was staying with me out of obligation but his heart wasn't in it anymore. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. Everyone was staring at me. Gavin immediately said that was completely untrue, that he'd never said anything remotely like that. Sloane ignored him and kept looking at me. She said Gavin had told her he connected with her in ways he didn't connect with me, that their conversations meant everything to him, that he'd said she understood him better than I ever could. My mom looked horrified. My dad asked Sloane if she was serious right now. Sloane started crying, said she hadn't wanted to fall for her sister's husband but the heart wants what it wants, that Gavin had been sending her signals for months, that she knew he felt the same way even if he was too loyal to act on it. I looked at Gavin. He looked completely blindsided and furious. Here's the thing though, I knew Sloane was lying, not hoped, not suspected, knew. Because 2 months ago when her texting and calling had gotten especially intense, I'd talked to Gavin about whether we should involve my parents. He'd suggested we wait and see if setting boundaries worked first, but he'd also said if it escalated we should document everything just in case. So Gavin had started screenshotting every text Sloane sent him, every call log, every voicemail. We had 2 months of evidence showing exactly what their communication looked like. Polite, brief responses from Gavin, increasingly familiar messages from Sloane that he never encouraged, multiple instances of him setting boundaries that she ignored. I pulled out my phone, told everyone to hold on for a second. I opened the folder where Gavin had been saving screenshots and started reading out loud. Sloane texting Gavin asking if he wanted to get lunch, just the two of them, Gavin responding that he was busy but she should join us for dinner sometime. Sloane sending Gavin a late-night text saying she missed talking to him, Gavin responding the next morning saying he hoped she was doing okay with the breakup. Sloane calling Gavin at 11 p.m. on a Tuesday, Gavin declining the call and texting that it was late and he'd talk to her another time if it was important. I read probably 15 exchanges. The pattern was clear, Sloane pursuing, Gavin politely deflecting. Then I got to the text from 6 weeks ago where Gavin had explicitly told her he needed to scale back their communication, where he'd said he valued her as family but the constant contact wasn't appropriate. Sloane's face had gone from red to white. She started saying those screenshots were out of context, that there were other conversations, phone calls where he'd said different things. I asked her to pull out her phone and show us these other conversations. She said she'd deleted them, that she'd wanted to move on so she'd erased everything. My brother asked why she'd delete evidence of something that supposedly meant so much to her. Sloane started crying harder, said we were all ganging up on her, that she knew what Gavin had said to her, that we could twist his words all we wanted but she knew the truth. Gavin very calmly said he'd never once told Sloane anything about having feelings for her or being unhappy in our marriage, that every word he'd ever said to her had been appropriate and familial, that he was sorry if she'd misinterpreted his kindness but that was on her, not him. My dad told Sloane she owed us both an apology. Sloane lost it, started screaming that I'd always had everything, that our parents had always loved me more, that I'd gotten the perfect husband and the perfect life and she was supposed to just accept her leftovers. She said Gavin was supposed to be hers, that she'd seen him first at a coffee shop 7 years ago before I'd ever met him, that she'd been working up the courage to talk to him when I'd walked up and started flirting with him like I always did, taking what should have been hers. This was news to me. I'd met Gavin at a coffee shop near my old apartment and we'd struck up a conversation organically. I'd had no idea Sloane had even been there that day. Sloane said she'd watched us start dating and had tried to be happy for me but she'd known from the start that Gavin was meant for her, not me, that she'd spent 7 years watching the man she loved be with her sister. My mom tried to hug Sloane but she shoved her away, said none of us understood, that she'd tried so hard to get Gavin to see they belonged together but I'd poisoned him against her. My aunt very quietly said that what Sloane was describing sounded like an obsession, not love. Sloane grabbed her purse and left, just walked out in the middle of her own meltdown. We all sat there in silence for a solid minute. My dad finally said he'd had no idea things had gotten this bad with Sloane, that he'd noticed she'd been struggling since her breakup but he hadn't realized she'd built up this entire fantasy. My mom was crying, kept apologizing to me and Gavin, said she should have seen the signs. Gavin and I left shortly after, drove home in silence because what do you even say after something like that? We've been home for about 2 hours now. Gavin keeps apologizing even though none of this is his fault. He feels guilty for being nice to my sister, for not shutting down her attention more aggressively from the start. I told him he did everything right, he set boundaries, he was transparent with me, he never encouraged her. But I'm sitting here trying to figure out how my sister convinced herself that my husband was in love with her, how she built this entire narrative in her head where Gavin was secretly pining for her. My mom just texted saying Sloane won't answer her calls, that she's worried about her mental state. I'm worried too but I'm also furious. My sister tried to blow up my marriage in front of our entire family based on delusions. She accused my husband of things he never said or did. She's apparently been obsessed with him for 7 years. I don't know how we come back from this. Update. It's been 9 days since the family dinner disaster and I'm updating because the situation has somehow gotten worse and I need outside perspective on whether I'm handling this correctly. The night of the dinner, my mom texted saying Sloane wasn't answering calls. I was too angry and exhausted to deal with it so I didn't respond. The next morning, my mom called. Sloane had finally answered around 3 a.m. and told my mom she was fine but needed time alone. My mom asked if I could reach out to Sloane, just check in and make sure she was okay. I said no. That Sloane had publicly accused my husband of leading her on and tried to destroy my marriage based on complete fabrications, that she could reach out to me when she was ready to apologize. My mom said she understood I was hurt but Sloane was clearly going through a mental health crisis and family needed to support each other. I told my mom that supporting Sloane didn't mean enabling her delusions or pretending what she'd done was acceptable, that I loved my sister but I couldn't have a relationship with her until she got professional help and took accountability for her actions. My mom went quiet and then said maybe I was right, that she'd encourage Sloane to talk to someone. I didn't hear anything for 3 days, then my brother Reese called. He said he'd tried to talk to Sloane and she'd told him the screenshots I'd read at dinner were faked, that Gavin and I had fabricated evidence to make her look unstable. I asked if Reese actually believed that. He said no, of course not. The screenshots matched up with things he'd observed over the past few months. Sloane showing up at our house constantly, talking about Gavin excessively, getting weird when anyone mentioned our marriage. He'd just thought she had a small crush she'd get over. He said what worried him was that Sloane genuinely seemed to believe her own version of events, that she'd convinced herself Gavin had feelings for her and any evidence to the contrary was manipulation. That scared me, because if Sloane truly believed her delusions, this was bigger than family drama, this was something that needed professional intervention. I told Reese I agreed she needed help but I wasn't going to be the one to coordinate it, that I was too close to the situation and too angry. Reese said he'd talked to our parents about getting Sloane into therapy. Meanwhile, Gavin had been getting weird messages, not from Sloane directly but from her friends. 2 of her close friends had sent him Instagram DMs asking for his side of the story. Apparently Sloane had told them that Gavin had been having an emotional affair with her and I'd found out and was trying to turn the family against her. Gavin screenshot the messages and sent them to me. We decided he wouldn't respond, engaging would just create more drama. But then one of Sloane's friends, a woman named Piper who I'd met a few times, texted me directly. She said she'd known Sloane for years and something wasn't adding up about her story. She asked if I'd be willing to talk. I almost said no, but something about the message felt genuine so I agreed to meet her for coffee. We met yesterday afternoon. Piper apologized for reaching out but said she was really worried about Sloane, that Sloane's version of events kept changing and getting more elaborate. First Sloane had told her friends that Gavin had confessed feelings for her, then it became that they'd been having an emotional affair for months, then it became that they'd kissed once but Gavin felt too guilty to leave me. None of it matched what had actually happened but Sloane was telling these stories like they were absolute truth. Piper said she'd started asking questions, asking for specifics, timelines, evidence. Sloane had gotten defensive and accused Piper of not believing her. I showed Piper some of the screenshots from Gavin's phone, the clear boundaries he'd set, his consistent redirection of Sloane's attention. Piper looked relieved and upset at the same time, said she'd suspected Sloane was exaggerating or misremembering but seeing actual proof was different. She told me something that made my skin crawl. About a month before the family dinner, Sloane had asked Piper to help her plan what she called an intervention. She'd wanted to sit down with me and Gavin together and tell me that Gavin had been unhappy for a long time and I needed to let him go. Piper had refused, told Sloane that was insane and she needed to back off from her sister's marriage. Sloane had stopped talking to Piper for 2 weeks, then she'd come back acting like the conversation had never happened. Piper said she should have said something to someone then but she'd hoped Sloane would drop it. I thanked Piper for telling me, asked her to please encourage Sloane to get help if she had any influence. Piper said she'd tried but Sloane had cut off most of her friends at this point. Anyone who questioned her narrative got iced out. I left that coffee feeling even more unsettled than before. My sister hadn't just had a moment of delusion at a family dinner. She'd been building this fantasy for weeks or months, planning interventions, constructing elaborate stories. When I got home, my mom had left me a voicemail. She said my dad had convinced Sloane to see a therapist, that Sloane had gone to one session and then refused to go back because the therapist had suggested she might be experiencing something called erotomania. I looked it up. It's a delusional disorder where someone becomes convinced that another person, usually someone of higher status or unattainable, is in love with them. The person misinterprets normal interactions as secret declarations of love. It fit way too well. My mom said Sloane had been furious at the diagnosis, said the therapist was wrong and didn't understand the situation, that she didn't need therapy, she needed her family to stop gaslighting her about what she knew to be true. My mom asked again if I'd be willing to talk to Sloane, help convince her to continue therapy. I said absolutely not, that me inserting myself into Sloane's treatment would make everything worse, that Sloane needed professional help from someone outside the family dynamics. My mom cried, said she didn't know what to do, that watching Sloane self-destruct was killing her. I felt for my mom, I really did, but I also couldn't fix this. Sloane needed help I wasn't qualified to give. Then last night, something happened that crossed a line I didn't even know existed. Gavin and I were watching TV around 9 when our Ring doorbell went off. I checked my phone expecting a delivery. It was Sloane, standing on our porch. I showed Gavin, we both froze. Sloane rang the doorbell again, then knocked, then called through the door that she knew we were home because our cars were in the driveway. She said she needed to talk to Gavin, just 5 minutes, that she deserved a chance to explain herself. Gavin and I looked at each other. I asked if we should call the police. He said let's see if she leaves on her own first. Sloane kept knocking, started saying she'd made mistakes but her feelings were real and didn't Gavin feel anything at all? Couldn't he admit there had been something between them? Gavin called my dad, explained the situation and said either my dad came and got Sloane or we were calling the police. My dad said he'd be right over. Sloane was still on our porch pleading with Gavin to talk to her when my dad pulled up 15 minutes later. We watched through the Ring camera as my dad approached Sloane. She tried to tell him he didn't understand, that she and Gavin needed to talk alone. My dad very firmly told Sloane she needed to come home with him right now or there would be consequences. Sloane started crying but she went with him. My dad texted an hour later apologizing, said he'd taken Sloane's car keys and her phone, that she was staying at their house for now where they could monitor her. He said he was scheduling a psychiatric evaluation for her, that this had gone beyond family conflict and into something that required professional intervention. I felt relief and guilt simultaneously, relief that someone was finally taking this seriously, guilt that it had gotten this bad. Gavin has barely slept since Sloane showed up at our house. He keeps saying he should have shut down her attention harder from the start, that he was too worried about being rude or causing family drama. I've told him repeatedly this isn't his fault. He did everything right. He set boundaries. He was transparent. He never encouraged her. But I can see this is eating at him, the idea that his normal kindness somehow contributed to my sister's breakdown. We're looking into security cameras for the rest of the house, not just the doorbell. My dad says it's probably overkill, but after Sloane showing up unannounced, I'm not taking chances. My relationship with my sister feels irreparably broken. I don't know how you come back from this. My mom keeps saying Sloane is sick and we need to have compassion, and I do have compassion. I'm terrified for her mental health and I want her to get better. But I'm also angry and hurt, and I'm allowed to protect my marriage and my peace even if my sister is unwell. Final update. It's been 7 weeks since Sloane showed up at our house, and I'm updating because there's finally resolution of a sort, though not the kind anyone hoped for. After my dad took Sloane home that night, my parents arranged a psychiatric evaluation through their insurance. Sloane refused to cooperate initially, but my dad gave her an ultimatum: either go to the evaluation or move out of their house. She went. The psychiatrist diagnosed her with delusional disorder, erotomanic type, combined with some features of obsessive thinking that had likely been building for years, exactly what the first therapist had suspected. The doctor recommended intensive outpatient treatment, possibly medication, and complete cessation of contact with Gavin and me while she worked on distinguishing her delusions from reality. Sloane rejected all of it, walked out of the appointment and told my parents the psychiatrist was wrong, just like the therapist had been wrong, that everyone was conspiring to make her seem crazy so I could keep Gavin without guilt. My dad told her she had 2 choices: start treatment or find somewhere else to live. Sloane packed a bag and left. We didn't know where she'd gone for 3 days. My mom was frantic, calling everyone we knew. Finally Sloane texted that she was staying with an old friend from college in Tucson and needed space from the family. That was 5 weeks ago. In that time, Sloane has had minimal contact with my parents. She's called my mom twice, both conversations apparently going in circles about how we're all wrong about Gavin and her. My mom has been devastated. She started therapy herself to deal with the guilt and grief of having a daughter who won't accept help. My dad has been more pragmatic. He's sad, but he's also said multiple times that they did everything they could, that at some point Sloane has to choose to get help and they can't force her. Meanwhile, Gavin and I have been trying to rebuild normalcy. We installed security cameras around the house, changed our phone numbers and gave the new ones only to people we trusted, set all our social media to private. For a few weeks it seemed like maybe Sloane moving to Tucson was the distance everyone needed. Then 2 weeks ago, things took another turn. Gavin got a LinkedIn message from someone he didn't know, a man named Brody who said he'd recently started dating Sloane and she'd told him some concerning things about her family. He wanted to verify the truth. Gavin screenshot the message and showed me. We debated whether to respond. Finally Gavin sent a brief reply, said that Sloane had experienced a mental health crisis involving delusions about Gavin and that her family had encouraged her to seek treatment but she'd refused, that he couldn't speak to what Sloane had told Brody but suggested Brody be cautious about taking her statements at face value. Brody responded asking if Gavin had proof of these delusions. Gavin sent him 3 screenshots, the text where he'd set boundaries with Sloane, a message showing her continued contact after he'd asked for space, and a brief explanation that Sloane had publicly claimed they were having an emotional affair when no such thing had occurred. Brody didn't respond. We thought that was the end of it. Then 4 days ago, my mom called me crying. Brody had contacted her. He'd broken up with Sloane after talking to Gavin and Sloane had apparently had a complete breakdown. She'd called my mom from a hospital in Tucson. She'd taken a bottle of sleeping pills. She survived. The hospital pumped her stomach and she was medically stable, but she was on a psychiatric hold. My mom asked if I wanted to come to Tucson with her to see Sloane. I said no, that I loved my sister but I couldn't be part of her treatment or recovery, that my presence would likely make things worse given that her delusions centered around my marriage. My mom said she understood, but I could hear the disappointment in her voice. She and my dad drove to Tucson the next day. They've been there since. My mom called yesterday with an update. Sloane was being transferred to a residential psychiatric facility. The doctors said the suicide attempt combined with her persistent delusions and refusal of outpatient treatment meant she needed more intensive intervention. Sloane would be there for at least 30 days, possibly longer. She'd have limited contact with the outside world while they worked on medication management and therapy. My mom said Sloane had asked about me, asked if I hated her. My mom had told her no, that I didn't hate her, but that I needed distance while Sloane worked on getting well. According to my mom, Sloane had cried and said she'd ruined everything, that she knew she'd hurt me but she didn't know how to stop believing things her brain told her were true. That moment of clarity gave my mom hope, the first acknowledgement from Sloane that maybe her perceptions weren't entirely accurate. I felt something hearing that too, not hope exactly but a small loosening of the knot of anger and hurt I'd been carrying. My parents are staying in Tucson for another week to make sure Sloane is settled in the facility and to meet with her treatment team. After that they'll come home and wait. The facility limits family contact during the first phase of treatment anyway. They want to minimize external influences while they work on helping Sloane distinguish delusion from reality. My brother Reese has been surprisingly affected by all this. He called me a few days ago and said he kept thinking about how he'd missed the signs, how Sloane's behavior had seemed odd but he'd written it off as quirky or going through a phase. I told him none of us saw it clearly until it exploded, that Sloane had been good at hiding the extent of her delusions. He asked how I was doing, how Gavin and I were holding up. I told him honestly that some days were fine and some days I'd remember my sister truly believed my husband was secretly in love with her and I'd feel this profound sadness, not just for me but for Sloane and the reality she'd been living in that was so disconnected from actual events. Reese said his wife Hayden had pointed out that Sloane had essentially been heartbroken for 7 years over a relationship that never existed, that she'd watched Gavin and me build a real marriage while she suffered through an imaginary one. When he put it that way, I felt something shift, still anger, still hurt, but also this terrible empathy for how much pain Sloane must have been in, living in a fantasy world where the man she loved was just out of reach, trapped with her sister. Not that it excused anything, not that it made what she did okay, but it helped me understand how she'd gotten so lost. Gavin has been processing everything differently. He's been reading about erotomania and delusional disorders, trying to understand what happened from a clinical perspective. He told me a few nights ago that the hardest part was accepting that nothing he could have done would have prevented this, that Sloane's brain had taken his ordinary kindness and constructed an entire narrative around it, that even if he'd been cold or distant from the start, she likely would have interpreted that as him fighting his feelings or being forced to hide his true emotions. The delusion would have found evidence regardless because that's how delusions work. We've talked about what happens if Sloane does get better, if treatment works and she's able to recognize that her beliefs about Gavin were false. I don't know if I can have a normal sister relationship with her again. Too much has happened, too many boundaries were violated, even if her brain chemistry was responsible, the damage to our relationship is real. Gavin says he'll support whatever level of contact I'm comfortable with, that he has no interest in ever being alone with Sloane again but he won't ask me to cut her off entirely if I don't want to. I appreciate that he's leaving it up to me, but the truth is I don't know what I want. Part of me misses my sister, the version of her from before all this, the person who used to text me random thoughts at midnight and knew exactly what to say when I'd had a bad day at work. But I don't know if that person exists anymore, or if she ever really existed outside my perception of her. My mom called this morning with another small update. Sloane had a family therapy session via video call with my parents yesterday. The therapist had Sloane walk through the timeline of her feelings about Gavin and when she started believing he returned them. According to my mom, Sloane had become very agitated when pressed for specific evidence. She'd insisted there were signs but when asked to name them she kept circling back to the same things. Gavin had smiled at her in a certain way, had remembered details about her life, had been kind when she was going through her breakup. The therapist had gently pointed out that those were normal behaviors for a brother-in-law, that Gavin had treated her the way family members typically treat each other. Sloane had gotten upset and said the therapist didn't understand, that there was a connection she couldn't put into words. My mom said watching Sloane struggle to defend beliefs she'd been so certain of was heartbreaking, like watching someone try to hold water in their hands. The therapist told my parents that this was actually progress, that having Sloane question her certainty even slightly was a step toward reality testing. But recovery would be slow. Delusional disorders are hard to treat because the delusions feel absolutely real to the person experiencing them. Medication might help but it wasn't a guaranteed fix. My parents need to prepare for the possibility that Sloane might never fully accept that her beliefs about Gavin were false. She might always maintain some version of the narrative even if she learns not to act on it. That reality has been sinking in over the past few days. My sister might genuinely believe for the rest of her life that my husband was in love with her. She might get well enough to function and stay away from us, but internally she might never stop believing her version of events. I don't know how to grieve that. The loss of the relationship we had combined with the knowledge that she's living in a different reality than the rest of us. Last night Gavin asked me if I regretted reading the screenshots out loud at the family dinner, if I wished I'd handled the confrontation differently. I thought about it for a long time before answering. I told him no, that as horrible as that night was, it forced everyone to see what was happening. If I'd pulled Sloane aside privately or tried to handle it quietly, she might have continued building her delusions unchecked. My parents might not have pushed for psychiatric evaluation. Things might have escalated even further. The public confrontation was brutal but it was also clarifying. It made hiding impossible. Gavin said he'd been thinking the same thing, that as much as he hated that night, it had probably prevented something worse. We've started talking about the future in concrete ways again. We'd put off some decisions during all the chaos with Sloan, whether to try for kids, whether to look for a bigger house, whether Gavin should take a promotion that would mean more travel. We're slowly starting to make those plans again, reclaiming our marriage from the shadow Sloan's delusions had cast over it. I'm also trying to rebuild my relationship with my parents separate from the Sloan situation. We have lunch every week now, just the three of us. We don't talk about Sloan unless there's a significant update. We're trying to remember how to be a family outside of crisis management. My brother and I have gotten closer through all this too, shared trauma bonding I guess. He's been a good sounding board for the complicated feelings I have about Sloan. As for Sloan herself, she'll be in residential treatment for at least another month. After that the plan is for her to move into a transitional living facility where she'll have support and structure while continuing outpatient therapy. She won't be moving back to Phoenix anytime soon. My parents have accepted that. They're planning to visit her in Tucson monthly, but they're also trying to maintain boundaries and not let her treatment consume their entire lives. Whether Sloan and I will ever have contact again is an open question. Her treatment team has said family reconciliation isn't a goal of early treatment. Right now the goal is just helping her stabilize and function. Maybe someday we'll be able to sit in the same room again. Maybe we'll even be able to have some version of a sister relationship. But it won't be the relationship we had before. That's gone, built on a foundation where I didn't know she'd been obsessed with my husband for our entire relationship. I'm trying to make peace with that loss, with the fact that my sister had a whole internal life I knew nothing about, that while I thought we were close, she was living in a fantasy world where my marriage was an obstacle to her happiness. Gavin asked me last week if I thought Sloan had ever actually loved me or if I'd just been competition to her. I said I think she loved me and resented me simultaneously, that those feelings coexisted in ways that probably confused her as much as they hurt me. People are complicated, mental illness makes them more complicated, and family makes everything infinitely messy. I don't have a neat resolution to offer. Sloan is in treatment but might never fully accept reality. My relationship with her is permanently altered. My parents are trying to support her while maintaining their own well-being. Gavin and I are healing but will probably always be cautious about family boundaries in ways we weren't before. What I do have is clarity about my marriage, about the fact that Gavin never gave Sloan reason to believe he wanted her, about the fact that I can trust him completely because he did everything right even when it was uncomfortable. I also have clarity about my own boundaries. I'm allowed to protect my peace even when someone I love is suffering. I'm allowed to step back from Sloan's treatment and recovery. I'm allowed to prioritize my marriage and my mental health. Those permissions have been hard-won. I spent the first few weeks feeling guilty for not being more involved in Sloan's care, for not visiting her in the hospital or the facility. But I've come to understand that sometimes love means distance. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is let professionals help them while you maintain boundaries that keep everyone safe. My mom is still learning this too. She struggles with wanting to fix Sloan versus accepting that Sloan has to do the work herself. We're all learning to live with ambiguity, with the reality that Sloan might get better or might not, that our family might eventually heal or might always have this fracture running through it. For now, I'm focusing on what I can control: my marriage, my home, my boundaries, the relationships that are healthy and reciprocal. I'm letting go of the fantasy of the sister I thought I had and trying to accept the reality of the sister I actually have, someone who is sick and struggling and may never see the world the way I do. It's not the ending I wanted, but it's the ending we have.